I really would just love to learn more about you. You have such an impressive background and resume, and you're a researcher and a PhD. Can you just give us a little bit of background? How did you get into what you were doing? What are your interests?
I love food. That was the sort of the beginning of the story. I love everything about food. And I actually first wanted to become a cook, but my parents said, no way. So you have to go to college. So I picked a nutrition that's closest to food as I could pick. So I studied in nutrition and I became a dietitian in a hospital. I was working at a VA, a veteran hospital at the time. And I got frustrated because nobody listens to me
What do you mean by that?
because Because as an inpatient dietitian working in a hospital, oftentimes we only have about 10, 15 minutes to consult with a patient, and then we would spend 1 hour or more charting. So if you think about it, 15 minutes, there's no way you can change someone's behavior in 15 minutes. So we end up just like talking them through, but I just was really frustrated that nobody listens to me. I had patients who have severe kidney disease, really severe diabetes. They do not want to change. They told me that my job is so boring. I should have a cute guy take me to In-N-Out, get a big burger and large fries.
Wow. And I'm just imagining you in a VA hospital trying to convince people to eat better. And I also know that I spent time in the hospital when I was pregnant, the last 7 weeks of my pregnancy, and my husband was amazing, like brought me the food that I wanted to eat because the food options in the hospital were not great at all. I mean, is that how it was?
No, not great at all. So when I was working at a VA, how we feed patients is what we call plop on. It's basically TV dinner, just bought in bulk to save cost. And
Wow.
if you think about it from that perspective, right, it's not fresh food, it's packaged. And while you balance the nutrition, calorie in and calorie out, you completely ignore how much nutrients and how much contamination are in this food, and then you're feeding sick people. It's problematic.
Very problematic. And it's such a big piece of illness, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's overlooked. So you were so frustrated with the nutrition in the hospital. So what was your next step?
I was much more frustrated that people are not willing to change.
Oh,
So much more than what's served in the hospital. I mean, served in the hospital, it's a whole separate problem itself. It's hospitals are also bounded by how much money they can spend on food. And with the budget they have, that's pretty much the option they have, considering they have to balance the calorie and then balancing the nutrients and all these. So there's limitation there too. But my most frustration is people are not willing to change, and we don't really have a way to facilitate this behavior change and also sustain the behavior change. So I thought at the time, if I can go back to school, study environmental health, if I can change the environment, then I don't have to tell people what to do. If we don't actually have all the fast food restaurant, all the liquor stores and the convenience food, the packaged food, then I don't have to tell people what to do. They're forced to go to farmers market. They're forced to buy their fresh veggies, and they're forced to learn cooking and then make their own food. So that was my initial thoughts. When I got to grad school, and I realized, okay, I was being a little naive. It's more than that. It's more than where people shop. It's more than everything. It's also what's in people's food, right? So sure, you can shop for organic, you can shop for different things, but what's in your food? Also,
right.
organic is not 100% pesticide free, right? If you're not eating organic, then you just get exposed to a ton of other things.
Right. So did you grow up eating whole foods? Like, did your parents cook in a way that was with real foods? Is that just something you always knew, or was there a point that you made a switch, or was it always that way?
It has always been that way. So my family is a big foodie family. My grandma, especially, my grandma taught me how to cook, and then she always cooked. She made these elaborative family meals every weekend. So all like my cousins, my aunt, like everybody gets together and then eat together. So it has always been like that. And, over family dinner, you chat and then you talk. Nobody's like watching TV, like when you have a family dinner. So, and it's always like pretty fresh food.
That's amazing. That's so special. It's a lot of people don't have that, or not, food is
Hmm.
not that way in their life. It's all about convenience and flavors. So that's interesting. So you knew there was a difference in the food that was in the environment that was being served to us, all the fast food and what you had experienced. And so you realized You might not be able to change what's being served, but you had
So
some
at that
next.
time, I was just thinking, okay, so for my dissertation, for my PhD, I have to do a big project, what we call it dissertation. And I actually did my dissertation in China because at the time I was interested in the food environment. How does the food environment impact adolescents' risk, obesity risk?
Mm,
Because at that time, if you think about Asian kids, like Chinese kids compared to American kids, we always thought Asian kids are skinnier, but that's actually not the case, even 10 years ago. So China was experiencing as high of a rate of childhood obesity as the US almost.
really?
So it was kind of shocking. And then the food environment is changing because then you see more McDonald's, Pizza Hut, all the fast food, all the convenience stuff getting into China. People are getting lower physical activity because they stop biking. Everyone owns car. So it's kind of adapting this Western lifestyle. So I was
Okay.
really interested in that. But when I got there, I realized, yes, it's not where kids shops and then eat their food, their family. It's also what's in their food, considering there was pesticides contamination, heavy metal contamination. And so I was just really curious, like what's going on. So I ended
Hmm.
up doing some food testing, and I found out that food that you purchase in like some green label at the time, it's not regulated, organic's not regulated, nothing was regulated. So I found there's more heavy metal contamination in so-called organic versus something you can just buy in wholesale market, way cheaper. So it was like really shocking to me.
Yes.
And kids are also not getting enough physical activity, so it's really compounded effect. But then me as a researcher, I couldn't do anything because my purpose for getting my dissertation done is that we do these observational, as part of environmental epidemiology, is that you do these observational studies. You don't intervene, you just observe. So I
Right.
followed these kids over 3 years. There was nothing I can do. Like I literally
Hmm.
just observing them having really bad lifestyle. There's nothing I can do about it other
Yeah.
than like publishing my paper and graduate. So I
Right.
got frustrated again at that point, and I was just like, okay, first of all, there's several problems there. First of all, there's nothing I can do about it. I want to learn how to do intervention so I can change these kids' behavior and then change their life to be on a better trajectory. And then the second it got me thinking is, sure, like we're exposed to all these things, but given you and I have different genetics, even if we have the same exposure, we still would respond really differently, right? So how do we have this personalized approach to people's exposure, to people's health? So these two things kind of got me thinking, okay, what's my next step? So then after that, I decided to do a postdoc to learn exactly how to do interventions. How do we really change behavior? So I can take what I learned in epidemiology, how to do exposure assessment, and then change it to behavior change, so we can inform people about their exposure so then they can make changes.
That is so important and so amazing because I think that is where people struggle. It's so multifaceted, health
Mm-hmm.
and exposures, and it feels overwhelming and you want to be able to point to one thing, and then it really is just hard to change in general for people, and finding a way. It seems like you've really found a way to motivate people with what you've done with Million Marker. I love that it's so behavioral focused because that is maybe the biggest piece of it.
I totally think so, because you get exposed to thousands of chemicals, right? There are things we cannot control. So, you go outside, you cannot control the air quality you breathe outside. But again, that's like air is all connected. You can't change that, right? But like for your personal care product, for example, for your food, you have control. So because there are so many things out of control, we should really take control of what we can actually control.
Absolutely. I find myself saying that it just in my content to my audience all the time. Like this is I call it, for lack of a better word, the low hanging fruit. This is the stuff we can be empowered to do. As upsetting or disheartening as the information is, you have the power to make changes and improve health in these ways. And so, was your next step Million Marker?
My next step, I was like cooking the idea of a million marker, because at the time people are getting more interested in direct to consumer testing, like the 23andMe's and testing your genetics. So
Oh
I
yeah.
got really interested in this approach, because another hurdle that we're facing when it comes to like my professional life studying these environmental exposures and chemical is that we get exposed to very low dose, a little bit, but you get exposed to day in and day out. And then on
Mhm.
top of that, we can't really, it's really hard to study these chemicals and then also study how these chemicals could causing certain disease because of one, low dose exposure. Second, traditional research is that, you expose the population to certain things and then you see what happens. But you can't get a group of pregnant women and then give them a bunch of BPA, right? And then observe what happened to them and to the kids. You can't
Right.
do that. So
Right.
I was also really frustrated. First of all, we don't have a good way to study this causal impact, but it's so important because oftentimes we get a lot of pushback from the industry, even from policymakers, even from doctors. They will say, when it comes to these environmental chemicals, like, okay, show me the causal impact. But we can't say it's causing this thing. We can only say it's associated. But I think big data could potentially solve this problem, is that we are able to study better about the impact of these chemicals in free living individuals versus like a really controlled experiment, right? And then at the same time, we'll be able to observe very subtle impact of this kind of low dose and long-term exposure, and then be able to do interventions. So that was sort of like my motivation of wanting to do something kind of similar to what 23 and some of these genetic company have done, is if we can gather big data, then we can better study these chemicals and then provide better information to the public.
That's so interesting. And that seems like would be such a key. And but it's also frustrating because it in a way it feels like common sense. Like these individual chemicals have been tested and like evidence shows this is probably not good. But in order to you have to prove it. You have to go through all these lengths, but it's very commendable that you are approaching this problem and trying to get the data and put it together in a way so that we can say black and white, this is problematic and what do we do about
Yeah, I was also doing it for myself because at the time when I was studying all these, I was having a lot of fertility troubles. So I have a autoimmune condition that prevents me from carry through a successful pregnancy. So not until my fourth late stage pregnancy loss, the doctors were able to diagnose me. So each time, like a spanning of almost 10 years, that I was just told, good luck next time. But because I studied these chemicals, I knew they could have a huge impact on fertility. So I was really frustrated, and I was, every time I go to the doctor, I would say, could I get a test or somebody assess my environmental exposures? I mean, I know how to do it through survey, but I want to analytically test, like, to figure out what's exactly inside of me.
right?
But
Right.
there was
Wow.
like no other way to test. Like, you go to a doctor, unless you go to a functional medicine doctor nowadays. But 10 years ago, I felt like I couldn't get the answers I wanted. The only test available was heavy metal, but that's
Mhm.
not like, sure, we can test heavy metal, but there are so many organic chemicals that we're talking about, from pesticides to, like, the bisphenols, the phthalates, like the PFAS, and all of these things can impact your fertility, but there's like no way to test. But I know these tests exist. They, like, we're literally being biomonitoring through the CDC to look at population level exposure literally for decades. Public
Mm.
have no idea about this information, and then second, the test was not available. So I was just really frustrated. I want to know that information. So I felt like even if I just get a sense of assurance knowing this is not causing my infertility issues, I would be very happy, but there's no test available. So kind of combining with my personal frustration and my professional frustration, I was like, okay, since nobody's reading my papers anyway, and I should like switch. And then so that's why I founded Million Marker.
Wow, what a story. It's so personal and so many people can relate to this. And it is makes so much sense what you're saying because I read studies, the CDC puts out information about phthalates and parabens, but why do we as individuals not have the ability to know what's in our own body? It's just it's mind blowing and it's
Mm-hmm.
so amazing that you put those things together. And so did you end up doing the test on yourself? first?
Yep. I absolutely did the testing myself, testing close friends and the families to figure out how do I even, put together a kit. But there are also a lot of surprising things I found about myself too. Is that first of all, these exposures, like the one that we currently test and the one we have low, what we call it, you call it low hanging fruits, these transient chemicals, they actually like once you get exposed to, they can store or leave your body within 24 to 48 hours. We call them low hanging fruit because if you avoid your exposure, then you don't have it. Your body will have the natural system to eliminate them. But the flip side is that you need to think about this all the time and control your exposure all the time so you don't have this in you, right? So a few things I found out is number one is I have to be very diligent about my exposure. You always have to go out of your way to think about your exposure. There's just no way out. But I think once you adapt this lifestyle, then it becomes easy. It just become routine. And the second was a few things that I found out episodic exposure that I think this is where the value of individual testing comes into play, is that I'm already reading product labels. I'm already avoiding fragrance. I'm already like avoiding plastics. I'm avoiding everything I could already. But through the testing, I was able to find out a few surprising facts. One of them is that, if I eat out more, if I eat out more and more takeout, my BPA level, my phthalates level would shoot up. And then one time we did the testing on myself. That was the time that I was packaging all the kits to send it out. So the packaging tape, the clear packaging tape that we use all the time to, our return shipping, sending out, was giving me high phthalates. And you don't think about these things all the time because that's just like a normal routine, right? But then if you think deeper, it makes sense because that clear packaging tape is flexible plastic. Nobody's like really like, there's no regulation on tapes. So they're just like such common sense. And you touch it, that flexible plastic, which is probably mostly phthalates, and you touch it and you touch a lot, then I just saw my phthalate level shooting up super high.
It's repeated touching, and it's an important point too, that it's what you ingest and it's what your skin comes in contact with.
Exactly. But this is something you can control. Right now that I know the sources, next time I'm touching these things, I'm going to wear a pair of gloves, like ideally cotton glove. Because another thing I found out, not through myself, but through some of my customer, is that the food prepping gloves can also leaching phthalates into your food. This is the reason why we really want to recommend people to eat out less, especially fast food, and ditch that glove. You don't need a glove food service use glove in order to prevent potential foodborne illness. But if the prep worker properly wash their hand, you actually don't need the glove. But the glove itself is not regulated. So a lot of them could be made of a ton of phthalates. And if you think about it, they're using that glove, touching hot food, and then touching your food. So basically everything is leaching into your food. And it's really bad for the food worker themselves too, because they're wearing that glove. Again, it's
All
absorbed
day.
through dermal all day. Exactly.
What are the gloves? I know at the store you can go and buy gloves, like you can buy nitrile gloves. And are there a specific type to be avoided? Should all gloves be avoided? Is there a safer glove, do you think?
I think in general, like a glove made of rubber, natural rubber, is a little bit better. But I also, a lot of people might have allergy to rubber. But in general, it's just like, okay, if you can't avoid using products, like use least amount of products, the better. That's just across the board. That's also something we've seen after doing 5 years of testing, is that there's a direct correlation between how many products people are using and their exposure.
Wow. So I hope people listening are taking these takeaways are just incredible. Eating out less, so simple. Enjoying cooking food at home makes a big difference. Not using plastic gloves and using less, which is interesting. I have found since I kind of started my personal journey of trying to use clean products that I really like products and I like makeup, but I use fewer. But I just don't need as many. So much is marketed to us as a need that is really just another product for companies to sell that we don't actually enjoy or benefit from. I use fewer. Some of the stuff I buy is probably more expensive, but I use less, and it's a simpler way of living, and it's a small thing, but it's clearly impactful based on your research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I have like reduced my routine, before I would use like a shampoo, conditioner, like a bunch of other things. And now I have reduced my routine to a shampoo bar. I don't even use liquid shampoo anymore. Because if you think about it, like, the not only that you're using extra stuff, but you also is generating a lot of waste. It's mainly plastic, right? A
Yes.
lot of the shampoo bottles are coming in plastic bottles, right?
Right.
Versus like a shampoo bar, it's literally a cardboard box, and they actually last longer. And if you like to travel, it's just so
Easy.
easy to pack. So it's just like a reduction of routines, right?
Right. And things like body wash, that's one that always blew my mind. I prefer a bar soap, but when you think about the bottles of body wash, when you could just use a
Mm-hmm.
bar soap, it works. I mean, they're just as good. It doesn't make sense. And then you can think about it on a personal level too. If you have, maybe you don't need conditioner, if your hair is on the oilier side,
Mm-hmm.
you just use shampoo. Like my hair is drier. I don't need to wash it every day. I go longer between
Mm-hmm.
washes. My hair is healthier. It's just all these little things. If it's just a thoughtful way of living, and it does seem overwhelming at first, but like you said in the beginning, once you get going, it's really not that hard.
Exactly. And then there's a ton of evidence showing that once people start changing small things, and then good things follow. So there's a ton of research showing, okay, if you started eating better, all of a sudden you're like start thinking about, okay, I need to exercise more, and I need to change this thing, change that thing. And the same as living a low tox life is once you start doing this, because this is so much related to not just your product, but also your food. And we can also talk about exercise, because exercise by sweating, you also is detoxing and get rid of your toxins. So it's just all like kind of go in hand. So if you start small and all of a sudden, say a year or two later, you're going to be adapting such a healthy lifestyle. And then you're going to spread the words, telling your family, telling your kids, telling your parents, telling your friends. So it's just like, there's just like no downside to this. And on top of that, once you start this journey, because a lot of these chemicals that we're talking about are petroleum-based chemical, they're really bad. This synthetic, it's petroleum-based. It's really bad for the environment. If you reduce your plastic exposure, you're reducing your chemical exposure already, and you also is creating a much more sustainable environment. That's not just good for yourself; it's good for everybody. So
Yeah.
why not?
Why not? I love everything that you said, and I see why you're so passionate about behavior and have a behavioral focus, passionate about changing behavior. And I also want to ask you, you said exercise does detox the body because you will read conflicting information about this. Can you expand on that a little bit? Do we really detox when we exercise and sweat?
So the basic is like, when we measure these chemicals, right? So these, especially transient chemicals, they are generally, you get rid of them through pooping, through your stool, and then through urinating, through your urine, through sweat, and some of them do get deposited in your blood. That's why we want to really reduce exposure all the time. But this natural detox system, about 90% are actually you get rid of through your urine, some of them through your stool, which also means you should have a good gut health, because that's part of it. And then through sweat too. So by sweating, you get rid of it. And the reason I mentioned about it is because through measuring these, if you want to do a really comprehensive exposure assessment, you should be measuring your sweat, you should be measuring your stool, you should be measuring your urine, and you should get a fat biopsy, because they will deposit in your body, in your fat, in your blood. But a lot of these are like, it's limited by the method we have, because in sweat, like how we can detect these chemicals are lab method is really hard, and it's harder to detect, and then majority of them in the urine, so that's why. But then these are just like different ways of thinking through, like how do you get rid of it. And sweating is one of the way, and exercising obviously have other benefit too, right? So for your health, if for everyone who's aging is a natural process, but exercise can really help you stay young by maintaining your muscle weight, also increase your insulin sensitivity. So it's just like so many added benefit: better sleep, better metabolism. Exercise can also help your gut moving faster, because you also need that gut to get rid of your toxins. And then we can also talk about, there's the gut brain axis, right? Like then
I'm
talking about your
fascinated.
mental health. So
Yes.
it's just like so connected. Like it just all comes down to healthy lifestyle. Period.
Absolutely. It's all connected. And I know that I feel best when I move every day. And that's why I exercise, because my head is clear. I feel better. I interact with
Mhm.
the world better. And I like that you mentioned the petroleum is based ingredients and the effect on the environment. It's not something that I put at the forefront. Like my focus has always been health of the person, but it's a byproduct. When you are living in a healthier way, it's also better for the environment, which is really important. Can you tell me about the specific chemicals that the million marker test tests for?
Yes. So right now we test for 13 chemical metabolites. That's include BPA, BPS, and BPF. Those are the bisphenol family. We test for phthalates, 5 of them, both low molecular weight phthalates and high molecular weight phthalates. We also test for parabens, 4 parabens, as well as oxybenzone. And I can go in a little bit deeper to talk about like, when people hear these chemical names, like, okay, where are they from? Like, what are the impact? So I can go in a little bit to talk about each of them. So bisphenol is sort of the poster. BPA is like the poster child almost for hormone disrupting chemicals. And people often see BPA free label on their drinking bottles or cans. When you see, like, we often ask people, like, how do you know, like, how do you know about bisphenol? So it's like, okay, I know it's bad for me because it says BPA free. But here I want to caution people is that, BPA free doesn't mean any other bisphenol free. Right now we test for BPS and BPF, but this is only literally the tip of the iceberg.
Hmm.
That manufacturers, thanks to conscious mothers, got BPA banned since, like, 2012, because they realized it's in baby bottles, and then the baby are drinking this, and BPA is a really bad hormone disruptor. It actually mimics estrogen, and it's linked to a slew of health impact, from infertility to ADHD to cancer to everything. So thanks to the conscious mother, but industry got smarter is because BPA is banned. We only banned one chemical. We did not ban a whole class of chemical. So what they did is that they just switched the end of the molecule. Literally, you can have a combination from change from BPA all the way to BPZ, the entire alphabet, or any combination of the alphabet. Because now we've seen you have, other than BPS and BPF as alternatives, you also have BPAF, BPZ. So just like,
Right. It
it's
reminds
unlimited.
me of the perfluorinated chemicals. You see things that say PFOA free, but there's thousands of harmful PFAs. And it's this regrettable substitution. I don't like these free claims. I think they're just so misleading for consumers that are trying to make the right decision. They think they're making the right decision unknowingly.
Yes. This is why scientists are urging policymakers to, when they're ban something, they need to ban as a class, just to prevent this regrettable substitute with the BPA story.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Then and all three of these, BPA is the first one you talked about. BPA, parabens, and phthalates are all chemicals that you said go through your system within 24 to 48 hours, right?
Yes.
And
So these are what I consider low-hanging fruits. And if you think about it, a lot of these chemical actually occurs in personal care products. So we talk about BPAR in cans, they're actually on receipts. This is why we tell people don't touch receipt, always get receipts, email it to you. If you have to touch it, make sure you wash your hand. Don't use a hand sanitizer afterwards. Properly wash your hands. The reason for that is a hand sanitizer oftentimes has skin penetration agent.
yes,
So if you think about it, even if you use a hand sanitizer that's fragrance free, that the skin's penetration agent will make your BPA like seep through your skin a lot faster and deeper, which is no
right,
good. And if you use hand sanitizer with fragrance in it, then you just get the double whammy. So you have the fragrance, which is actually the next chemical, phthalates. Phthalates are in a lot of the fragrance to make the fragrance stick onto your body for a lot longer. So this is what we call it low molecular weight phthalates. So high molecular weight phthalates are mainly used in plastic. So they're the one that making plastic really flexible. So it's really important that we often see people do as part of their, initial behavior when it comes to getting exposure is that they would store their food in a plastic Tupperware, which is a lot of time plastic Tupperware, shatterproof. Many times they would have BPA in it or have phthalates in them. And then they will put like the plastic saran wrap, flexible plastic on their Tupperware and then stick in the microwave to make it hot. So if you think about it, you're getting literally like multiple exposures. Storing the food in plastic Tupperware, you're already getting one-time exposure. That saran wrap on top of the food, you're getting another exposure. And then on top of that, you warm it up. So by heating things up in plastic, it will actually increase the release of the chemicals from the plastic into your food. So you're literally getting the triple whammy. So don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't heat your food. Don't put food in plastic. That's an easy one. And I like that. I mean, I like using glass for food storage. It's so durable and it lasts forever. I mean, I've had the set that I bought 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great switch to make. It might seem like a little bit more expensive at the top, but you don't have to replace it the way those plastic ones get so gross.
Exactly. So over time, this is actually saving you money. And I think another thing that people kind of, I felt like everyone needs to get over is that you're doing prevention work here. You're preventing yourself from getting sick like 20 years down the road. Because these toxins are, we talk about toxin load is every day you add a little bit, you add a little bit. You just don't know when your cup's going to get full. And if you think about it,
Right.
if you get sick, not only you have to spend a ton of money treating yourself, your quality of life completely goes down the drain. And then you're gonna like also make your family and friends frustrated because it's also impacting people around you when you're sick.
Yes.
So
Yes.
to me, like this is why it's a low hanging fruit again, is that these changes are very easy to implement. It's great for your health, it's great for the environment, and it's more importantly, it's helping you prevent these exposures could potentially causing an impact like 20 years from today.
Right. And it's why it's so important and amazing that we have educators like yourself because people just don't have access to this information. And most of what's being offered is the opposite of all the things that you're saying, which is unfortunate. We can't change that immediately, but what we can change is what we choose. And I think that the more people know and the more people choose, then the more those safer options are going to be available to everybody.
Absolutely. And then when more safer options available, then the price drops. It's cheaper. It's just
Yes.
good for everyone. So you
It's
kind of have like, we really encourage everyone to become conscious consumers because your purchase actually impacting how these manufacturers and suppliers, business are making decisions. So then when more sustainable product, more clean products are in the market, then the price goes down, that everyone benefits.
Absolutely. And I've seen it over 10 years. And while they don't always get it right, companies notice and do change. Because when I started this and my journey in 2014, nothing was called clean.
Mm-hmm.
Clean is everywhere. So they know that consumers want it and they're trying to provide it, but we just have to be diligent and specific about what we are demanding by what we choose to buy. BPA phthalates are in our products and they're in our food. Parabens, I associate this with a product risk, but can you give us your thoughts on parabens and where we're most likely getting exposed and what we should do
Yeah.
about it?
Paraben is also a hormone disruptor that it's not as well studied as BPA and phthalates, but it pretty much have the same impact. Parabens are usually used as preservatives in personal care as well as in packaged foods. So especially for ultra and processed food. So when parabens are using like these packaged food, it's not even labeled as parabens, so you can't even see it. It's like labeled as hydroxybenzoic acid. So they use that on food instead of writing paraben.
So on like a bag of chips or a box of crackers or frozen foods, all of these things.
They could have paraben, and also oftentimes that I don't think it's required to label paraben if they're like used like at a small amount, but they're in there. It's kind of like a long time ago we talk about avoiding trans fat, and then so people start using eating trans fat free food. But this trans fat free label, it doesn't mean trans fat free. It just means that per kilogram or of food that it has less than 0.05 grams of trans fat. But if you're eating a ton of even trans fat free food, you're still going to accumulate that trans fat. So it's like the same thing with these chemicals. And at least trans fat is regulated. These chemicals are not even regulated. So anytime that when a product says paraben free or phthalates free, there's actually not 100% guarantee it's actually free. It's still better than not, having that, right?
It's better, but it's not, it's just very misleading is what it is. And I found that with fragrances that phthalates are often hidden in there behind this ingredient called alcohol denat. And a lot of times the companies don't even know that theirs might have phthalate in it because the raw supplier that they're buying it from, they didn't ask.
Exactly, exactly.
Problem.
It's a problem. It's really complicated and it's very hard to address.
Is there anything else you wanted to add about parabens?
Yes, so we test for 4 parabens, and then not all parabens are created equal. We do
Okay.
see one area it's really hard to avoid paraben is the over-the-counter ointments or creams. So we have customers who's using that hydrocortisone cream for their eczema or for their rash or whatever that you can buy over the counter. And that has always been, we haven't really found a clean one that without paraben. And sometimes, if you absolutely have to use it sparingly. Don't just use it all the time. Only use it when you absolutely need it. And if you look for these cream, oftentimes it is labeled on the cream. Oftentimes you will see, sometimes you would just see paraben, but sometimes you will actually see specific paraben. So the 4 paraben that we test are methyl, ethyl, propyl, and butyl. And it just means how many carbon chain it has. So from 1 to 4, butyl is 4, methyl is 1. So the issue here is that butyl is significantly more toxic than methyl. So, and then also propyl and butyl are actually getting banned, at least in California, very soon. Last year, they just signed, it's now a part of Prop 65 that is getting banned, but it's not going to get implemented until like 27 or 2030. So there's still a long time. So if you have,
Yeah.
2 creams side by side, that if you absolutely have to choose one, then choose the one with methylparaben versus the one with propyl butyl, because propyl and butyl are much more toxic.
Great advice. That's super helpful. I did not know that about the hydrocortisone cream. Hopefully someone out there listening who makes one will make one without it. That would be nice.
That
It
would
is
be really nice.
it's good when you hear about action being taken, but it's also important to know that even when the regulations do come out, it's so long before something actually happens. It's a lot of times it's just decades of people being exposed. And so we have to take a proactive approach if we know things might be harmful because we can't just depend on the
Absolutely,
regulation.
absolutely. The plus our policy is literally moving at glacial speed, literally. So we, as individual, I think it's just so important to protect ourselves, especially now we see autoimmune conditions on the rise, diabetes, cancer, you name it, ADHD. So it's just so important to protect yourself.
Yep. It really is up to us. The system is not set up to and just doesn't protect us. It has to be up to us. So, what are some of the things? So, people are taking the million marker test, which is a urine test. Is that correct?
Yes, it's a urine test. People can just pee in a cup, send it back to us. We get it analyzed. But we do, for your personalized report, we do ask people to complete an exposure journal, because this will allow us to try to pinpoint where your exposures are coming from. This part is a bit time consuming, but it's just added benefit for folks that trying to get down to, okay, what is exactly could potentially give me that high reading of the exposure.
Right. And so people get their results back and then they can make lifestyle changes and then see how that impacts
Yes.
their
So in the
number.
report, we report back your levels, how you compare with the national average. And then if you have done that lifestyle audit, then we'll actually audit your lifestyle, meaning that we'll check, okay, are you consuming packaged food? Are you using water filter? Out of all the products you're using, what are the ingredients of concern in your products? So we'll point out not just the chemicals that we test, but any problematic chemical that's been shown having any health impact, we let you know. So that next time you buy a product, you can buy a better one.
Yeah, I love that. It's actual information from your own body so you can be empowered and motivated to make those changes. I think it's amazing what you're offering with Million Marker and these test kits, and people that are concerned have a place to go and get themselves tested It's like you said, you had nowhere to turn when you wanted to know what environmental toxins are in my body that could be potentially be affecting my fertility, which is such a big, I think a big part of the discussion is fertility because so many people struggle with that.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, IVF is really expensive. It's really expensive, and in general, it's not just like you do one cycle of IVF, you're done, right? Like many people go through 3 to 4, averages like 3 to 4, like 3 IVF cycles. That's a lot of money. And also people don't really prep for their pregnancy, which is like, I think that's again a preventative like lifestyle mindset shift, because people spend a lot of time planning for their wedding. Well, that's important, but shouldn't you think like planning for a life is even more important? So
That's a
spending time
great
and money
point.
planning for that pregnancy is actually important, that maybe you can even avoid IVF cycles, which saves you money, easy on your body, and great for your kid.
Right. And all the heartache and all the emotional
Mhm.
part of that is huge. And so another thing I know we've been going, but I wanted to ask you, I found this so interesting about wanted to ask you about your clinical trials and other work that you were doing to try to spur behavioral changes for people.
Yeah, so we're running clinical trial right now, and then the main goal for that is figure out the best way to facilitate behavior change. I think for the listeners for your podcast, these are the forefront folks that already somewhat conscious about their low tox living. That's why they're listening to this. They're motivated. But I think for majority of the people, it's still really hard. If you don't have prior knowledge, it's very hard for you to make these changes. So we're creating education curriculum, adding to, in addition to the test, to give people a little more hand holding and education to make the lifestyle change more sustainable. So that's the clinical trial we're running. And then in addition to figuring out like the best behavioral program, we're also adding in certain like clinical biomarkers to address the hurdle of this causal thing that I mentioned. We can't pinpoint, and then we can't do prospective cohort kind of experiments to expose people to something and then looking at the results. So our strategy is let's detox people to reduce their exposure. Then we can see if any of their clinical biomarker actually approved. So doing it in a reverse way. For
Yes.
the study, we're also tracking people's metabolic biomarkers such as A1C, cholesterol, because again, chemicals have to do with your food consumption. We're also tracking inflammation biomarkers, because that's also another way, like your CRPs, like that's another marker that these chemicals can actually increase your inflammation. We're also tracking hormone biomarkers, because these are hormone disrupting chemicals. So our hypothesis is that people go through the detox program would have improvement in their biomarkers, but we'll see. We should find out more next year.
Wow. So is that when it will wrap up next year?
Yes, it'll wrap up next year. Right now, we're recruiting participants right now, and we're actually having trouble recruiting men. We have a lot of like really active, very engaged like ladies joining our study, but we're having trouble recruiting men. So any men out there listening to this,
That-
or ladies, have your husband like check out our website and then join our study.
And is that at Million? Where can we find out information about that? Is that
We
Million?
have we have it on our website, where you just email us, and we'll get you the information to help you fill out the eligibility questionnaire to see if you're eligible, and then we can get you enrolled in the study.
And then I'm curious, how long does the process take for a study like that to get published, for people to see the results and get the information? It's a really long project.
It's a long project. While the study runs for about 3 months, but to set it up, to figure out the study flow, and then analyze the data, and then get published, it's at least like 2 years.
I see. You are doing so much impactful work. I think it's incredible. And so I have to ask, I mean, has this been hard? What have been the struggles of starting all of this? What has this been like for you personally?
It's been pretty hard, but I think like challenge is also opportunities, right? So because it's hard, that's why nobody's doing it. But if we can actually crack this nuts, then it's very rewarding. But I think the blessing is also through this process. I met so many incredible individuals like you, like doing this process, promoting this work, and then spreading the knowledge. And I also have a really good team. it's hard. It's chaos all the time. It's like you're putting out fires all the time, but at the same time, it's also rewarding that I felt like I can't think of anything else I'd rather do. Because before this, I was on the path of becoming a professor, and now I'm thinking back, it's like, I think I made the right choice.
You are so inspiring. So inspiring to me to watch what you're doing, to hear you talk about all of this. And you are clearly so passionate about what you're doing. And I think even that in and of itself is such an important message for people. If you have that burning desire, then you put up with all the chaos and, like you said, putting out fires nonstop. And the mission is so important to you. And so thank you so much for sharing, for all that you're doing, and for sharing your story with me today. Is there anything else that you want to add or takeaways for the audience? I mean, I really think you gave so much, honestly, to make lifestyle changes right away, but I just want to give you that opportunity.
I'll just summarize it quickly because we talked about a lot of things and people might actually get overwhelmed. So I would summarize, if people want to start their detox journey, you just do like 5 things. First of all is avoid fragrance. That's number one, because that's also the super low hanging fruits when you buying product. Avoid fragrance at all cost. Don't get fooled by aroma, and don't get fooled by unscented. Unscented is actually a scent. So go fragrance free. Second is eating. We talked about it. Eating in actually also create a bonding time with your family, and you have full control over your food. Really important at reducing your exposure. The third is to use a water filter, because our water system, which we didn't talk too much about, our water actually have a ton of chemicals in them, whether it's heavy metal or the PFAS or other things. So if you use a water filter, any filter is better than no filter, but if you have a reverse osmosis filter, that's sort of a catch-all filter, so do that. And the next is be a conscious consumer. Avoid canned food, and then avoid touching receipts, and you can reduce your exposure that way too.
Great tips. Those are such awesome tips that people can start right away. I love that. And I thank you for coming on. I'm honored to spotlight all that you're doing, and I'm glad we've met.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the work you do as well.
Thank you.